For decades, the public has been trained to trust big names in the pharmaceutical industry. If it comes from a famous laboratory, it automatically feels safe. If the brand name is familiar, doubt tends to disappear. But recent history tells a very different story. Neither Pfizer, nor Johnson & Johnson, nor GlaxoSmithKline, nor Purdue Pharma have been immune to scandal. In fact, it is often the largest and most powerful companies that appear most frequently in investigations, massive fines, and billion-dollar settlements. And it all begins with a simple but dangerous idea. Approval does not mean absolute protection. GlaxoSmithKline and off-label marketing. In 2012, GlaxoSmithKline made history by agreeing to a settlement of approximately $3 billion with the U.S. Department of Justice. At the time, it was the largest criminal settlement ever reached by a pharmaceutical company. On paper, the charges sounded technical, almost bureaucratic. In reality, they were explosive. Investigators concluded that the company promoted medications for uses not approved by regulators, while simultaneously withholding or downplaying critical safety information that could have influenced medical decisions. One of the most sensitive cases involved the antidepressant Paxil. Although approved only for adults, it was promoted for use in adolescents, even as internal studies suggested an increased risk of serious adverse effects in that age group. Those findings were not emphasized in marketing materials or presentations aimed at doctors. Another example was Wellbutrin. Officially approved for depression, it was informally promoted for weight loss, sexual performance, and addiction treatment, none of which were approved uses at the time. Sales representatives were trained to suggest possibilities without ever formally documenting those recommendations. What makes this case especially unsettling is not just the violations themselves, but the timeline. These drugs had already been on the market for years. They were widely prescribed. They had already generated billions of dollars in global revenue. When the settlement finally came, the penalty looked enormous in headlines. But on the balance sheet, it represented only a fraction of what had already been earned. The profits came first. Accountability came much later. And this pattern, expanding use, maximizing revenue, and dealing with consequences only when unavoidable, was not unique to GlaxoSmithKline. It repeats itself across the industry with alarming consistency. Which brings us to the next scandal. Section 2, Opioids, Purdue Pharma, and a crisis built by marketing. Few cases expose the power of Big Pharma more clearly than Purdue Pharma and the painkiller OxyContin. Launched in 1996, OxyContin was marketed as a breakthrough in pain management, a powerful extended-release opioid that promised up to 12 hours of continuous relief. But the real engine behind its success was something else entirely. The claim that the risk of addiction was low, almost negligible. Sales representatives repeated this message in hospitals, clinics, and medical conferences. They argued that the controlled release formula reduced abuse potential. Some promotional materials even cited extremely low addiction rates based on weak or misinterpreted evidence. The problem is that later court documents and investigations showed Purdue had internal data that contradicted this narrative. Reports indicated patients developed tolerance quickly, requiring higher and higher doses. Others showed clear signs of dependence even when the drug was taken exactly as prescribed. Yet these warnings were not emphasized. Instead, the focus shifted toward expanding OxyContin's use beyond severe pain to far more common conditions. The impact was devastating. Prescriptions skyrocketed nationwide. Entire communities became saturated with chronic opioid use. Addiction stopped being the exception and became routine. What began as aggressive marketing evolved into a public health crisis, officially recognized as such, affecting millions of people directly and indirectly. Hospitals, healthcare systems, and governments were left dealing with consequences that extended far beyond physical pain. In 2020, under pressure from thousands of lawsuits, Purdue Pharma filed for bankruptcy as part of a multi-billion-dollar settlement related to the opioid crisis. The company ceased to exist in its original form. The controlling family faced legal restrictions and financial penalties, but by then, the damage was already done. The Purdue case made something impossible to ignore. When a chronic condition becomes a massive market, the incentive shifts from solving the problem to maintaining consumption. And that logic did not stop with opioids. 3. Lifelong medications and the forever model. Few phenomena explain Big Pharma's financial power better than long-term, continuous use medications, products designed not to fix a condition, but to manage it indefinitely. Drugs like Lipitor for cholesterol, Humira for autoimmune diseases, and Lyrica for neuropathic pain became some of the most profitable medicines in modern medical history. Humira is the clearest example. Developed and sold by AbbVie, it generated over $20 billion per year in global sales for multiple consecutive years. Not by curing conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or Crohn's disease, but by controlling symptoms as long as the drug was continuously used. None of these medications are marketed as permanent solutions. The promise is always the same: stability, control, quality of life, as long as treatment never stops. That is the core issue. Continuous control means continuous consumption. Continuous consumption means predictable, recurring revenue. Each new approved indication expands the patient base. Each extended use guideline lengthens treatment duration. Each combination with another drug creates a new product presented as necessary. In practice, patients enter a cycle with no clear finish line. Treatment stops being a temporary bridge and becomes a permanent state. Medically, this can be framed as responsible disease management. Economically, it is nearly perfect: lifelong customers, patent protection, and limited competition. But to maintain this dominance, especially as patents approach expiration, companies rely on an even quieter mechanism, and that is where the next scandal begins. Humira didn't just become one of the best-selling drugs in the world. It became the most cited example of strategic patent stacking. Launched in the early 2000s by AbbVie, Humira should have lost exclusivity after its standard patent term, opening the door to lower-cost biosimilars. But that didn't happen. Instead of relying on a single patent, AbbVie built a patent wall around the drug. Minor changes to manufacturing processes, delivery methods, formulations, and technical details were each filed as new patents. Over time, dozens of secondary protections surrounded the product. The practical outcome was simple: competition was delayed for years. Reports from the U.S. Congress and independent policy groups openly criticized the strategy, arguing it did little to promote real innovation and primarily served to block cheaper alternatives. Lawmakers even questioned whether such practices violated the original intent of the patent system. Meanwhile, American patients continued paying extraordinarily high prices for Humira, even as biosimilars became available in Europe at a fraction of the cost. Science had advanced. Alternatives existed. Access remained limited. The case made one thing clear: drug pricing is often shaped less by scientific complexity and more by carefully engineered legal strategies. And when patents keep prices artificially high, the impact hits where it hurts most: the patient's wallet, which leads directly to the next scandal: pricing. Insulin is one of the oldest and most essential medicines in modern healthcare. It was discovered over 100 years ago, and its creators famously believed it should be accessible to everyone, without commercial exploitation. Yet in the United States, prices moved in the opposite direction. Today, 3 companies dominate nearly the entire market: Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, and Sanofi. Together, they control most available brands and formulations, creating an environment with extremely limited competition. Over time, patients began reporting something once unthinkable: dose rationing. People with diabetes started using less insulin than prescribed, skipping doses, or stretching vials beyond recommended use simply because they could not afford the cost. Severe complications and hospitalizations became directly linked to insulin pricing. What made this even more controversial was that investigative journalism and independent reports showed parallel price increases among these companies, often occurring around the same time, despite no meaningful changes in the product itself. The insulin remained essentially the same. The price rose year after year. Behind these increases is a system largely invisible to consumers. Financial intermediaries negotiate rebates and discounts that rarely reach the patient. The higher the list price, the larger those behind-the-scenes discounts can be, creating a perverse incentive to keep prices inflated. At the end of the chain, the bill always lands on the same person, the patient. Insulin became a global symbol of how essential medicines can become inaccessible, not because of scientific limitations, but because of economic structure. And when the price of a life-saving drug spirals out of control, the issue stops being financial. It becomes a direct risk to life. Real recalls: ranitidine and Zantac. In 2019, a quiet alert completely changed how the world viewed one of its most widely used medications. Independent testing detected elevated levels of NDMA, a substance classified as potentially carcinogenic, in drugs containing ranitidine, including the popular brand Zantac. The shock was not just the test results, it was the scale. Ranitidine had been used for decades to treat heartburn, acid reflux, and ulcers. It was prescribed by doctors, sold in pharmacies, and available over the counter. Millions of people used it regularly, many for years. Zantac was marketed by major companies including Sanofi, reinforcing public trust. Few imagined such a long-established drug could carry a hidden risk. As investigations continued, it became clear the issue was not only manufacturing. The ranitidine molecule itself was chemically unstable and could degrade into NDMA under certain storage conditions. It could happen even after leaving the factory. The result was a global recall, with health authorities advising patients to stop using the drug and remove it from the market. In some countries, action was swift. In others, it took months. For many consumers, the warning came too late. People who had used the medication for years only learned of the risk after it was gone from shelves. The case raised serious questions about post-market surveillance. How could a drug used for decades only reveal such risks so late? How effective are monitoring systems at detecting dangers that emerge over time, not just during initial trials? The ranitidine scandal showed that approval is not the end of the story. Sometimes it is only the beginning. The recent surge in weight loss medications created one of the hottest and most vulnerable markets in modern pharmaceuticals. Drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy, developed by Novo Nordisk, rapidly shifted from medical treatments to global phenomena. Demand exploded. Supply could not keep up. That gap created a predictable and dangerous opportunity. Health authorities in multiple countries issued official warnings about counterfeit versions circulating online, through social media, unregulated marketplaces, and even unauthorized aesthetic clinics, promising immediate access. Investigations revealed an alarming reality. Some injections contained no active ingredient. Others had incorrect dosages. In certain cases, lab tests found unknown substances with no safety validation at all. To consumers, the difference was nearly impossible to spot. Packaging closely mimicked the originals. Names were identical. Prices, while high, seemed reasonable compared to long pharmacy wait lists. The driving force was desperation. People waiting months for legitimate prescriptions began searching for shortcuts, and those shortcuts led straight into a highly profitable black market where all risk was pushed onto the user. The case made one thing clear: popular medications create opportunities not just for innovation, but for fraud. When the promise is fast, visible, and highly desirable, the conditions for scams are ideal. Ironically, the more successful a legitimate drug becomes, the larger the shadow it casts in the illegal market. When access fails, safety fails with it. Which brings us to the final, and perhaps most subtle, scandal. Number 8. Pharmaceutical advertising and the power of Ask Your Doctor. Very few countries allow direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. The United States is one of them, and it created a multi-billion-dollar advertising industry that shapes how people understand health itself. Companies like Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson spend billions each year on television, digital, and print campaigns aimed not at doctors, but at everyday consumers. These ads follow a nearly flawless emotional formula. First, a common discomfort is introduced: fatigue, lingering pain, anxiety, difficulty focusing. Nothing extreme, something almost anyone can relate to. Then comes the pharmaceutical solution, framed as a turning point. Finally, the restored life: smiling faces, renewed energy, regained control. The message never says you need this drug. It suggests something subtler. Maybe you do not have to feel this way. Risks and side effects do appear, but usually at high speed in technical language, while positive imagery continues on screen. Psychologically, the brain has already associated the drug with relief before processing the warning. Numerous academic studies and policy analyses show this type of advertising significantly increases doctor visits and prescriptions, even when there is no clear evidence of proportional clinical benefit over simpler alternatives. The impact goes beyond consumption. It reshapes the medical conversation. Patients arrive with drug names already in mind. Appointments shift from exploration to confirmation. Ask Your Doctor has become one of the most powerful tools in modern pharmaceutical marketing. It shifts responsibility to the physician while planting demand before diagnosis. This model does not invent diseases, but it redefines thresholds, expectations, and tolerance for discomfort. And when marketing and medicine blend this closely, the line between information and persuasion becomes dangerously thin. This is the final scandal on our list, and perhaps the hardest to see. Because it does not happen in factories or courtrooms. It happens in the mind of the viewer. These 8 scandals are not isolated incidents or rare system failures. They involve the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world, repeating patterns across decades, countries, and billions of dollars. This doesn't mean all medications are bad. It doesn't mean that treatments don't save lives. Many absolutely do, but it does reveal something that cannot be ignored. Blind trust is dangerous. When profit, marketing, and healthcare intersect, decisions stop being purely medical and start reflecting incentives most people never see. Emotional advertising, regulatory loopholes, and financial strategies shape what reaches you and how it's framed. Ignoring these scandals doesn't erase them. They continue operating quietly while most people are never encouraged to question. And once you've seen this side of the story, pretending it doesn't exist becomes impossible. If you agree with what you've seen, or if you disagree, leave a comment. Discussion matters, and different perspectives help complete the picture. If this kind of analysis resonates with you, subscribe to the channel. Here, we question what's treated as normal, analyze what's sold as safe, and expose what rarely appears in advertisements. Because information isn't fear, it's awareness. And the next video may explore a question you were never encouraged to ask.